There's a particular kind of grief that doesn't have a name. It's not mourning, exactly, because mourning requires certainty. It requires a moment you can point to and say this is when it ended. This is where we said goodbye. The grief I'm talking about has no such moment. It has no grave, no funeral, no final quiet afternoon and let someone go. It is the grief of a door left open, of a phone number you still can't bring yourself to delete years later, because deleting it would mean admitting something you are not ready to admit. Jenny Nicholl's family has lived with that grief for nearly 20 years, and the man a jury decided was responsible for it has never for once told them where she is. Jenny was 19 years old when she disappeared, the age where your whole life is still an open question, where the story hasn't really started yet. She had brown eyes and a smile that people who knew her still talk about. She was born and raised in Richmond area of North Yorkshire, a town in the north of England that most people outside the UK have probably never heard of. A quiet, safe place. The kind of place where a 19-year-old girl should be able to walk home from work without the world ending. On the 30th of June, 2005, Jenny Nicholl was last seen leaving work in the early evening. She was never seen again. Her body has never been found. And somewhere between that Thursday evening and the moment you're watching this, a man went to trial. A jury delivered a verdict, and justice in the legal sense was served. But Jenny's family still can't bring her home. So I want to ask you to hold that thought as we go through this. Because that's the question at the heart of this case. Not just who did it, or how, or why, but what we owe to the people left behind, and whether a conviction on its own is ever really enough. This is the case of Jenny Nicholl. To understand what happened to Jenny Nicholl, you need to understand where she came from. Harrogate sits in the Harrogate district of North Yorkshire, about 15 miles north of Leeds. It's the kind of place where people know each other, where a girl growing up has a street she calls hers, a school she'll remember forever, a set of friends she's known since she was small. Jenny grew up in that world, and by all accounts, she thrived in it. People who knew Jenny describe her in remarkably consistent terms. She was warm. She was funny in the easy, unforced way that people love in someone. The kind of funny that makes a room feel lighter just because she walked into it. She was the person who remembered your birthday, who asked how you were doing and actually meant it. She was in the truest sense of the phrase, someone who made life better for the people around her. She was also at 19, still figuring things out the way all of us are at that age. She'd finished school and was working, saving money, deciding what came next. The future was open. There was no urgency to it yet. She had time. She was working at a leisure center in Harrogate. It was a regular job, the kind you take while you're thinking. Nothing glamorous. But it paid, and she liked the people, and it got her out of the house. Life was ordinary in the best possible way. And it was there, at that leisure center, in those ordinary circumstances, that Jenny met the man who would eventually be convicted of ending her life. His name was David Hodgson. David Hodgson was 44 years old. He was Jenny's supervisor at the leisure center, a man with authority over her in the professional sense. He was also married. He had children. He had a life entirely constructed around the kind of domestic stability that most people his age have spent 20 years building. And at some point, the exact moment is unclear, as these things often are, he and Jenny Nicholl began a relationship. I want to be careful here, because it's easy and too easy to reduce what happened between them to a simple story of predator and victim. The truth, as is almost always the case, is more complicated than a clean narrative allows. What we know is this: Jenny was 19 and Hodgson was 44. He was her boss. There is an inherent power imbalance in that arrangement that we shouldn't ignore. A younger employee and an older supervisor are never quite on equal footing, regardless of what either of them believes about the relationship. What we also know is that Jenny confided in people she trusted about it. She told close friends. She spoke about him. This was not something she was ashamed of, or at least not in the way you might expect. She was a young woman navigating something complicated, and she sought the counsel of the people she trusted most. Her family, for the most part, did not know. Hodgson, from the outside, would have appeared to be a stable, unremarkable man. Not the kind of person you look at and think, there is danger here. There are no records, none that emerged in the investigation, at least of violence. No criminal history, no prior warnings. He was just a middle-aged man in a small northern English town, living a life that had become, perhaps, too small for something inside him. Whatever that something was, it would cost Jenny Nicholl everything. Thursday, the 30th of June, 2005. It was a day like any other. Harrogate went about its business. The high street was busy. The summer light stayed long into the evening, the way it does in the north of England in June. That particular pale gold that stretches the day out, makes 8 p.m. feel like late afternoon. Jenny went to work. She had plans, friends she was supposed to see, just like every random evening. At some point that evening, Jenny was seen leaving her workplace. David Hodgson was the last known person to see her. She never arrived at her friends. She never came home. She never called. She never sent a message. She never made a single transaction with her bank account. Her phone went silent. Jenny Nicholl stepped out into that long June evening and walked into a silence from which she has never returned. Her family reported her missing as soon as it became clear something was wrong. And from the very beginning, something felt different about this case to the officers who picked it up. Missing persons cases involving young women are, unfortunately, not uncommon. And a large number of them, far more than most people realize, resolve themselves within days. Either the person went to a friend's house, or the person needed space, or the person, for whatever reason, wanted to disappear briefly from their own life and didn't think about the panic it would cause. This didn't feel like that. Jenny's family knew her. They knew the texture of her life, who she was, how she operated, what she would and wouldn't do. And a girl like Jenny, they said, would not just vanish. She would not go anywhere without telling her mother. She would not miss plans with friends without a word. She would not go silent, not unless something had happened to her. Investigators began piecing together the last hours of Jenny Nicholl's life. They spoke to friends. They spoke to family. They retraced her movements on the day she disappeared. And very quickly, a name started appearing in every conversation. David Hodgson. When police spoke to Jenny's friends, the people she had confided in about the relationship, they got a picture of a young woman who was deeply involved with her supervisor, even as she understood the complications that came with it. These friends knew about the relationship. They knew it had been going on. They knew the two of them were in contact regularly. And when investigators pulled the phone records, they found exactly that. Jenny and Hodgson had been in frequent, sustained contact in the weeks and days leading up to her disappearance. Call after call, message after message. The kind of contact that tells you this was not a casual or distant connection. This was something with real weight to it. And then on the evening of June 30th, 2005, the contact stopped. Not gradually. Not the way contact stops when two people drift apart or have a falling out. It stopped like a light switching off. From that moment forward, there is no record of Jenny Nicholl anywhere. No outgoing calls. No bank withdrawals. Not to buy food. Not to pay rent. Not for anything at all. No passport use. No CCTV sightings. No contact with any family member or friend. Not a text. Not an email. Not a letter. Not a single word through any channel. In the weeks and months and years that followed, as investigators and Jenny's family searched and waited and refused to stop hoping, Jenny produced no trace of herself anywhere on Earth. When detectives sat down with David Hodgson, he had an explanation. Jenny, he said, had been talking about going traveling. She had spoken about wanting to get away, start fresh somewhere new. He suggested that she had simply done what she had said she was going to do, that she had left, on her own terms, and that there was nothing more to it than that. It was a clean, simple story, except that not one person in Jenny's life, not a single friend, not a family member, not a colleague had heard her say anything remotely like that. The Jenny that David Hodgson described, the Jenny who was planning to disappear, bore no resemblance to the Jenny that everyone who actually knew and loved her recognized. And then there was this. If Jenny had gone traveling, if she had started a new life somewhere, as Hodgson claimed, she had done so without touching a penny of her own money, without using her passport, without contacting a single person she had ever cared about, without leaving so much as a footprint anywhere on Earth. The story didn't hold. Here is something I want you to sit with for a moment. Between June 2005 and 2008, for 3 years, Jenny Nicholl was a missing person. Not a murder victim, not officially legally, a case with a crime attached to it. Just a missing person. A girl who had not come home. Think about what those 3 years look like from the inside. From Jenny's family's perspective. Every morning you wake up and she is still not there. Christmas comes. Her birthday comes. And she is still not there. And you still don't know. And no one can tell you anything definitive. And the hope you are desperately trying to hold on to is getting heavier with every passing month. That is what Jenny's family lived with every single day. Meanwhile, investigators continued to build their case. Because while there was no body, while there was nothing that could definitively prove Jenny was dead, the picture that had emerged from the investigation pointed in one direction with a clarity that was hard to argue with. Hodgson was the last person to see Jenny alive. His account was inconsistent and unsupported by anyone who knew her. The contact between them, years of documented recorded calls and messages, had ended precisely when she disappeared. She had not touched her money, her passport, or her phone in 3 years. There had been no confirmed sighting of her anywhere in the world. Every line of evidence led back to the same conclusion, and eventually, the Crown Prosecution Service reached it. Let's rewind to the day David Hodgson was called in for investigation. A day after, Jenny's friend, Jennifer, received a text message from supposed Jenny saying, "Hi Jen, tell Jack I am okay. Know everyone's gonna be mad. Tell them I am sorry. Living in Scotland with my boyfriend. Shitting myself. Dad's gonna kill me. Mum don't give a shite. Hope Nick didn't grass me up. Keeping phone off. Tell Dad car jumps out of gear and stalls. Put it back in auction. Tell him I am sorry." On the same day, another friend of Jenny, Nicola, received a message from supposed Jenny saying, "Thought you were grassing me up. Might be in trouble with me, Dad. Told Mum I was eyeing. Didn't give a shit. Been to Keswick. Camping was great. Have to go, see ya." These messages were tracked back to around Carlisle. On the 14th of July, Jenny's dad also got a message saying, "Why do you hate me? I know Mum does. Told her I was going. I ain't coming back and the pigs won't find me. I am happy living up here. Everyone hates me and rich. Only mate I got is Jack. Text you in couple weeks. Tell pigs I am nearly 20. Ain't coming back. They can shite off. She got me in this shit. It's her fault, not mine. Get blamed for everything. I am sorry, okay. Just had to leave. She's a bitch. No food in and always searching me room, eating me sweets. Have to go, okay? I am very sorry, X." The message was sent from Scottish borders. Her phone was switched off after this and was never found. The investigators believe these messages were sent from someone close to her who knew details about her, such as the problems with her car, the person possibly being her killer, trying to make it look like she left home willingly. The person tried to imitate the way she texted, even though most of the spellings were not typically the way Jenny spelled. As part of the investigations, David Hodgson was told to write some sentences, and most of the words and abbreviations in the messages were the same with what he had written down. In 2007, 2 years after Jenny vanished, David Hodgson was charged with her murder. This was not a straightforward decision. No body murder prosecution. Cases where someone is tried for killing another person despite the absence of a body are extraordinarily rare in the United Kingdom. They exist. They have happened. The criminal justice system requires proof, not suspicion, not strong circumstantial evidence that points in a particular direction. Proof, beyond reasonable doubt. The kind of proof that 12 ordinary people, sitting in a jury box, can look at and say, "Yes, we are certain." When there is no body, the first and most fundamental question in any murder trial: is this person actually dead? cannot be answered with certainty in the way a jury typically expects. You cannot point to a body and say, here is the evidence of a crime. What you can do, what the prosecution in this case chose to do, is build a case from everything else. From the absence of any evidence that Jenny was alive, rather than from direct evidence that she was dead. It is, in a sense, a logical argument as much as a legal one. If Jenny Nicholl were alive somewhere, if she had genuinely chosen to leave, to vanish, to start over, it would look like something. A bank account used somewhere, even once. A passport scanned at a border somewhere, even once. A phone call to a family member, even once. A sighting, a social media account, a letter, something. 3 years had passed. There was nothing. The prosecution's argument was this: the only rational explanation for the complete, total, sustained disappearance of a healthy 19-year-old woman with no financial activity, no movement, no contact with anyone who loved her was that she was dead. And the evidence pointed to one person being responsible for that. The trial of David Hodgson took place at Leeds Crown Court in 2008. He pleaded not guilty. The prosecution built their case methodically, piece by piece, the way you have to when you are working without a body, when every brick in the wall is circumstantial, when the defense will challenge each one individually. They called witnesses who had known Jenny, friends in whom she had confided about the relationship, people who could speak to the kind of person she was and the kind of life she was living. They testified that Jenny had not spoken about traveling, that she had not mentioned leaving, that the idea of her simply walking away from her family without a word was, to anyone who actually knew her, implausible. They presented the phone records. The sheer volume of contact between Jenny and Hodgson in the period before her disappearance was striking on its own. But what made the records truly powerful was what happened at the end. That sudden, absolute silence. The last contact, time-stamped, documented, irrefutable, and then nothing. No explanation. No natural trailing off. Just stop. They challenged Hodgson's account at every turn. His version of Jenny as a young woman with wanderlust, casually planning to disappear, was dismantled by the testimony of everyone who had known her. His changing, inconsistent statements were laid out before the jury. The defense did what defense teams in no-body trials always do. They pointed at the empty space where the evidence should have been. There is no body. There is no forensic evidence. There is no proof that Jenny Nicholl is dead. A jury cannot convict a man of murder without proof that a murder occurred. It was a legitimate argument. But the jury had heard everything. They had sat through the phone records and the witness testimony and the expert analysis and the cold, cumulative logic of 3 years without a single trace of a living human. They deliberated, and they came back with a verdict. Guilty. David Hodgson was convicted of the murder of Jennifer Nicholl. He was sentenced to a minimum of 15 years in prison. The judge, in delivering the sentence, made clear the seriousness with which the court viewed what Hodgson had done, not merely the act itself, but the sustained refusal to give Jenny's family any information about what had happened to her. After the verdict, Jenny's family spoke. They were grateful. They said so clearly. A jury had looked at the evidence and decided that what happened to Jenny was not a mystery. It was a crime, and there was a man responsible for it. That matters. That is not nothing. But there are things that a conviction cannot give you. Jenny's body has never been found. In the years since the trial, in every year that has passed since that evening in June 2005, David Hodgson has maintained his silence on the question that matters most to the people who loved Jenny. Where is she? What happened to her? Where can her family go to say goodbye? He has never answered. There's something I've thought about a lot in preparing this, and I think it's worth saying out loud. We talk about justice in criminal cases as though it is a single thing, as though the verdict is the end of the story, the resolution, the moment where everything gets put right. But for families like Jenny's, justice has a dimension that the legal system simply cannot reach. They needed 2 things, accountability and closure. The trial gave them the first. David Hodgson's silence has denied them the second. Jenny's family cannot have a funeral. They cannot gather around a grave. They cannot have the rituals of grief that the rest of us take for granted. The ordinary, painful, necessary work of saying goodbye to someone you love. They have a verdict. They do not have their daughter. And so the grief continues. That particular, nameless grief I described at the beginning. The grief of a door left open, of a life with no ending you can point to. Jenny Nicholl would be in her late 30s now. She would have had decades more of that ordinary, precious life. Friends and plans and phone calls and fun evenings. All of it taken. The Jenny Nicholl case raises a question that I don't think has a clean answer, and I'm not going to pretend it does. No-body convictions are a remarkable thing. They require prosecutors and investigators to build a case from logic, from inference, from the careful, exhausting accumulation of everything that is missing rather than everything that is present. They require juries to make a considered, evidenced leap into a space where certainty is impossible. In this case, a jury made that leap. 12 people looked at everything that had been laid before them and decided, yes, beyond reasonable doubt, guilty. I think they were right. I think the evidence, when you look at it clearly, points in a direction that is very difficult to argue with. A young woman who adored her family does not vanish without contact for 3 years unless something has happened to her. The phone records don't lie. The bank account doesn't lie. The absence of any trace of Jenny's existence anywhere in the world doesn't lie. But the hardest question in this case isn't whether David Hodgson is guilty. The hardest question is whether the justice system, as it currently stands, has any mechanism for compelling someone like him to do the one thing that would give his victim's family something to hold on to. He knows where Jenny is. He has always known, but he has chosen, every single day for over 20 years, not to say. There is no law that can reach that. There is no sentence that compels a confession, and there is no courtroom procedure that can pry a location from someone who has decided to carry it to his own grave. So I'll end with this. Jenny Nicholl was 19 years old. She grew up in Harrogate, North Yorkshire. She had brown eyes and a laugh that people who knew her still talk about. She had plans on an evening in June that she never got to keep. Somewhere, in a location that only one living person knows. Her family is still waiting. Jenny deserves to be remembered. And cases like hers deserve to be talked about, loudly, clearly, and for as long as it takes. Thank you for watching. If this documentary meant something to you and you want more of these, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Welcome to the Black Room.